Bakar, right? Here you're going to have a guttural in the second position. All right. Now again, this isn't a big deal. Look at the example of Bakar. Talk about this form. What's irregular about a second guttural? Well, the forms you just learned and reproduced on the quiz, if you were writing this form, which has the oo ending, right? This is third plural, translated they, in this case, chose, right? They chose. If you were writing this form with the regular verb, what would it look like? Writing it with katal, it would be katal plus the oo ending. You'd have ka talu, right? That's what you should have written on your quiz. Ka talu. Now, what's irregular about the so-called second guttural here? Answer? It's got a composite schwa instead of the regular vocal schwa there. Once again, I say, big deal. Right? So at this level, quote, irregular verbs are not to be feared. You can figure this out. This isn't this tricky. And if that's all we ever mean by irregular verbs, I don't think it's going to be a big problem. Okay?
Does that move into the third also?
Right. Here's, all right, what about shalach? Oh, sorry, I switched.
Did you drop the meth egg intentionally on there?
Okay, good observation, right. Let me go back here and explain that, because I should. Here we put the meth egg there. Why do we put a meth egg there?
To indicate a long vowel.
To indicate a long vowel in an open syllable. And that's really not so much to tell you about this vowel, but to tell you about this vowel. Right? It's the meth egg that is telling you that this schwa is a vocal schwa. Okay. Now, back to this example. Why do you not really need the meth egg there? Because a composite schwa, by definition, is vocal. You know by seeing this schwa that it's vocal, and therefore you should know that if this is a vocal schwa, this vowel is in an open syllable, should be long, should be comets. So you already know what you need to know, and you don't need the meth egg to tell you that. Does that make sense? All right. See? All right, let's go on to this one now. Here, I've kind of messed this up. Can you isolate shalach ta? Is there anything irregular about this? Well, what would the corresponding regular verb be? Should have left myself some room here. If we wrote this out with katal, like you did on the quiz, this same form would be ka tal ta, right? Is there any difference other than the fact that the root is different? Answer?
No.
No. Is there a sense in which the verbal root shalach could be classified, however, as an irregular verb? Why? What would we call this one?
Third.
This would now be a third, right? Because the third root letter is a guttural letter. This would now be a third guttural. Do you see that? True, false. Just because a root is an irregular root, classified, for example, as a first guttural, a second guttural, or a third guttural, all forms will be irregular. False. You see what I'm saying? It's not like now we're doing a whole different paradigm of irregular verbs. All irregular means is something changes from the regular verb, it's predictable, and it only happens when you can predict why it's going to happen. Do you see my point? If you have a silent schwa under a guttural, then you don't have to worry about a composite schwa. You can get away with leaving a silent schwa under a guttural. It's only the vocal schwas that take the composite business. See what I'm saying? So there are times when, quote, irregular verbs are completely regular. They're only irregular when something happens that means you got to do something a little bit different. Do you see my point here? Now, here's an example, however, of where a third guttural does run up against something weird. All right? And so far, this is about as bad as it gets. All right? Because this is weird. It's not even completely predictable and explainable, but this is figure-outable. All right? Right? Even not being able, this is my point, even not being able to understand exactly what's going on, you should be able to figure this out. Right? What is this? Well, duh. It's the root shalak, and once again, this goofy ending t, which means it's second singular feminine. I'll tell you, those singular feminines, nothing but trouble, right? Yeah. I'll let Professor Adams speak to that. Yeah, this is just a weird form, right? Okay. And because of that, you're always going to have the potentiality of something goofy going on here. In fact, this now has shifted, instead of any kind of a schwa, it sort of looks like a segulate pattern, shalachath. You got that accent, shalachath. All right? And we've shifted to an A vowel. There's a reason why this is, if you're going to get an extra vowel, it's going to be an A vowel. Why? You already know that gutturals like A vowels. All right? Make friends of A vowels. So this is just kind of generated an oddity. Here's a legitimate oddity. Okay? But even here, you can figure it out. This isn't going to throw you. Uh-oh. What's happened here? Hey, all right, you might wonder what's happened, and it isn't that hard to explain what's happened, but quite apart from what's happened, can you figure it out? Say the word. Karathi. Now this is there's no dagish in the tau, right? Karathi. Do you see a root? Do you see an ending? Can you translate this? The ending is the first person I. The root kara, you know, means call, so this is all I called out or I cried out, right? Okay. Now what's happened here, however? Do you see that this is a little bit of a greater deviation from the norm, but the point I'm about to make is it's all still explainable and predictable. If we would write this thing as though it were the regular verb that you just reproduced on your quizzes, you would write it as ka-ra-ti. Agreed with me? This would be katalti with a different verb. All right? Now, here's what's happened. Here is an example, and I think we've seen this before, especially